Welcome to the Revenue Builders Podcast, a weekly show featuring B2B sales leaders and executives. Hosted by five-time CRO John McMahon and Force Management co-founder John Kaplan, the show goes behind the scenes with the people who have been there, done that, and seen the results. If you enjoy our content, please subscribe, rate, and review the show to help us reach more people. Revenue Builders is brought to you by Force Management. We help companies improve sales performance, executing the growth strategy at the point of sale. Find us at forcemanagement.com. Enjoy today's episode.
So, John, let's start with a simple question. You've been around, you've been very successful in your career. And when you look back, is there one lesson or a couple lessons you learned in your career in selling that you wish you knew, earlier in your career?
Oh, absolutely. So when I was graduating from BC my senior year, I was fortunate to get an interview with Wang Laboratories, which at the time was the leader in the mini computer business. Probably dating myself significantly for most of the folks that listen to this are like, what was a mini computer?
Wasn't John Chambers at Wang at that time?
John Chambers was my executive sponsor. So I'll get into that.
Yeah, I thought so. Yeah.
But the bigger legend, and if there is a bigger legend than John Chambers, is Bob Davis, who's the managing partner at Highland.
Right.
So my last interview is with Davis, and I'm up on 128 right over at Hanscom Air Force Base. And I get to the interview, and there's like 10 guys sitting out. It's like right out of some boiler room movie where everybody's interviewing for the job and who's going to differentiate themselves, and people have notes. And so I was the first one to go. I walked right up and walked in, and Davis grilled me for a couple minutes, and all of a sudden, a couple F-18s blow by, and we go up to the window, and his window overlooked Hanscom. And I said, "Oh, hey Bob, there's my dad." And my dad was down in the parking lot at the car, and he said, "Your father drove you to the interview?" And I said, "Sure did, yeah." He goes, "Okay, I got one question for you. And, if you answer this, the job's yours. If you get this right." I said, "Okay, all right." So lesson number one, be a good listener, right? Don't jump right out of the gate. You got to think through why he's asking the question. Why is that particular question being asked at that particular moment? Davis said, "What's the first thing you're going to do with your commission check?" And so I took a couple second pause. I thought about it. And I said, "Bob, I'm going to buy a car." Right. He goes, "Good answer. That's right." We ended up, what I took away from that was I probably should have used a little quid pro quo there. It said, "Bob, if I answer this correctly, you're going to kick the rest of those guys out."
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So thinking to the next step of that question, like, okay, why are they asking it? And then what's going to happen based on your answer? So that was uber important. And I learned a lot of lessons from really just observing Bob. He was a shooting star at Wang in a time where the company were bordering. I started there. I went through a year-long training back when companies used to invest in training. I lived at the Lowell Hilton for 1 year to go through every imaginable training, Sandler, Aclavis, you name it, game theory about selling, margin analysis, et cetera. But I'd come back every once in a while and participate in district meetings, regional meetings, and the company was in absolute turmoil. And my office was up in a little town called Bedford, New Hampshire.
Sure.
And Davis, I came down, and of course I tried to get over there to shake his hand, and John Chambers was there, et cetera. And at the time, we had just announced a new CEO. And wouldn't you know it, I'm getting in the elevator to go downstairs to get a cup of coffee, and Bob and this guy, Rick Miller, get in the elevator at the same time. And the quintessential elevator pitch happened where Davis said, "We need to stop doing A and start doing B and start positioning our platform, blah, blah, blah." And this is a conversation that happened 30 years ago, and I remember it vividly. By the time they got to the bottom floor, Davis, who at the time was a regional VP, was now running marketing at Wang. Right. Mm-hmm. So just an incredible transformation, and a ton of respect for him. And he ended up going on to, he went to DataRam for a couple of years, but then ended up at a company search engine called Lycos. And of course,
I remember that. You love Lycos. They were one of the original search engines.
That's right. That's right. And he, I had a short conversation with him about working for him at Lycos, and that was mistake number one in my career.
But it sounds like the biggest lesson is really listening, which is so important when you're in sales. And a lot of people, I think, they get nervous on sales calls and they're thinking more about what they're going to say than truly asking a question and really listening and really feeling and really being part of the customer conversation. Have you seen that a lot in your career?
Absolutely. And I think it's fundamental to strong champion building in that the person you're speaking with, if they don't feel like you're respecting what they're saying or there's an action around it, then you're probably not going to get very far.
Yeah.
So
just to wrap up, is the hardest part of selling enterprise software today versus like, I know, you were at Wang and you had a number of other companies, Mobile Iron, Kana, but what's the hardest part of selling enterprise software today?
I just think that most of the industry still focuses, and we give it a lot of talk about selling on value and building strong justifications, but most of the companies out there still selling features. So there's a lot of feature differentiation discussions that go on. Oh, we do this, we do dedupe, they don't. And honestly, the bigger impact is what you can show the customer over their long-term business. So not only saving money, but growing the business, but also impacting all the other organizations. So whether or not you're selling data storage or you're selling a CRM solution, and that transformation is gonna exponentially happen with the introduction of all these new AI tools. So if you just
we can get into that a little bit later, but what you just said is so right. Like so many companies are still selling features. And I remember early in my career, I was selling features. I was guilty.
Sure.
But I remember sitting there talking about features and looking at the customer across the table or customers across the table and thinking, they have written on their forehead, like, why do I care? Like, I'm getting blank stares. I'm not getting any head nods. There's a problem here. But that's what the way I was originally taught was, sell feature, advantage, benefit, right?
Totally. Yeah.
But why do I care? You have to answer that question. And they're not caring about your features if they don't understand how it affects them.
That's right. And going back to, one of the highlights, and I'll get into parametric, but really understanding that concept of champion building and the belief that, a lot of folks, sure, they're looking to get promoted, they're looking to make more money, but honestly, they're just looking to do their job. And they're looking to do their job so nobody gives them a hard time, that they get it across the line and that they, are successful. To wrap up on Wang, I had Chambers as an executive sponsor, and for a year, he would call me at 4:00 on Fridays, and I'd have I'm not kidding, half an hour long discussion with John Chambers, who you knew was going to be something special when he presented at Wang. You listened to what he was talking about, and the thing about John is he knew the curriculum. He knew what I was studying. He knew, the ins and outs of, Aclavis and all the sales strategies. But the interesting thing is, he asked me one time, he said, well, what do you think about the product margins right now in the VS 7000? Mm-hmm. And it was one of those questions I knew was just trying to set me up or catch me. Like, was I really paying attention? And at the time, Wang had a 3% margin, which for all intents and purposes, once you put it in a box and send it out the door, is a negative margin. So with that said, I enjoyed those conversations. And then when he left Wang, he went to Cisco in 92. And I got a call from his assistant, and he said, hey, why don't you come in and interview for the state and local job in New England? And at Wang, I had a close friend of mine, Alan Waledo, who he's about 20 years older than me. I was 22 at the time. And Waledo said, hey, I'm going there. You should go there, etc. And I really thought a lot about, I really appreciated Alan in that when I was up at Bedford, I'd go to the BVI, the Bedford Village Inn, for a drink after work, 5 o'clock, a couple of the other guys. And one night I forgot something. I go back it's 8 o'clock at night, and there's Alan sitting at his desk. So like, I prided myself on outworking, right? I could outwork anybody. I was going to run as hard as anybody. I might not be as fast, but I was going to get it across the finish line. When I saw that with, he had 2 teenagers at the time, he had a wife at home, and that guy was not going to take no for an answer. And he went on to have an unbelievably successful career at Cisco.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if we go back, I'm going to pull you back into the sales process. So, listening is super important. Agree 1,000% on that. And then selling value is important instead of features. So then really why is it that so many people screw up the discovery phase of the sales process, where that's where you can really listen and unearth the issues and pains that the customers have? Why do they try to go so fast through that process?
Because they're looking for an outcome that checks the boxes, and sales is not a box checking process. So, and I've sold products that were super feature rich, and the features differentiated yourself, but what was the value to? When I was at Mobile Iron, one of the key features that sold in a company went from 0 to 100 million in 18 months was when employees were using their phones for work purposes, and they would leave, they would wipe the whole phone, and hence all my pictures would get wiped. That little aspect to it caused so much pain and agony in companies that a lot of them were going to go back to, eliminate the bring your own device world and go back to corporate issued phones, just because they didn't want to get into that. And so translating that value over and leading the buyer down that journey versus them kind of dictating how that works is uber important.
Yeah, Johnny, I think that on this topic of value and features, I've always found it was never either or. It was an intersection, because companies that do a great job of providing the knowledge of what the features, advantages, and benefits are, that has an absolute place. You have to have the technical expertise and the differentiation, but you can't have that without the connection, what I call like the intersection to business outcomes. And I think the greatest companies in the world, they figured that out. Like they taught people to have their feet in two places. One foot is in the technical, the technical expertise, the technical capabilities, and the other foot was in the business outcomes. And I've always found, like in enterprise sales, you can't do one without the other, especially today, because most of those companies today are entering through a technical aspect, and maybe they were a product-led growth or what have you. And so they have a technical conversation, they have a technical presentation, which is an absolute must. And then they have to intersect into a business outcome in order to get into the enterprise. So I've always found the intersection. It's never either or. We got lucky because back in the day, they taught us features, advantages, benefits. And as we progressed through our careers, guys around our ages or people around our ages, value became an important conversation. But for the people listening, you can't do one or the other. You have to do both. Have to.
Right. Spot on. And a lot of times when you inherit a sales organization, you come in and you can see it right out of the gate, right? And it starts with really the definition of gold standard in most organizations doesn't exist. So really having the sales team repeat that value proposition back and meeting you in that intersection, John, you're spot on. It's not frustrating. It's just there's a do-over that needs to happen, and it needs to happen pretty quick. So.
And what's the backdrop of it
that you found to do that? Like you've taken over multiple sales forces in your career. What's the best way to get those people to move from being on one leg to being on both legs, as Cap described?
certification. So starting with a first meeting presentation. And one of the things I gleaned from the guys at Gong years ago, I met Amit in Israel, the founder. He shared with me that, and he's an expert at sales engagements, and so very valued voice that I listened to. And what he said was, hey, listen, nobody cares about your career, who you are. They want to know about the company, and then what you can do for them. And oh, by the way, that has to be under 6 minutes. So in every organization I've been at, I've really done this gold standard first meeting pitch. I get marketing together. Now I get my AI bot together, and formulate probably a 6 or 7 slide presentation. And I'm literally looking for precision in that case. It's pass or fail. And then we obviously elect somebody that does the best job, bring them forward, and really make a big deal about gold standard to get that consistency. And I do the same thing on any kind of product demo. And ultimately, I've been a proponent for years around playbooks, which is your wrap-up presentation.
So talk a little bit about that, John. That's a really interesting thing that you brought up. You said about your presentation should be about 6 or 7 slides in about 6 minutes. Talk about how you got to that. I'm really curious about that because I see a lot of people that build slide presentations. It's a 20 slide presentation. There's lots of words, things like when they throw up the slide and has tons of words, it just kind of turns me off. And I just want them to tell me what's going on. How did you arrive at that? And can you talk about some of the stuff that should be in those 6 or 7 slides?
Yeah, I think there's some key themes that run through most organizations, which is, folks aren't. A lot of customers don't really care when you were founded or how much money you raised, or and most of the time,
again, you're talking about yourself. You're not talking about the customer, why they should care.
That's right. That's right. So, I'd say like the successful ones I've been a part of, and at Qumulo now we're going through this process of like identifying what are the key triggers in the market, which is, okay, there's a significant movement towards cloud. The hyperscalers are dominating across the board on both compute and storage. The on-prem guys, have the Isilons and Dells of the world, but how do you bring that whole, how do you bring all that unstructured data together? That's what people are interested in. And oh, by the way, it's compounding annually at 40%, right? So setting the stage for this problem's only going to get worse. And if you don't do something today, creating a sense of urgency with the customer that, the dollar you spent today might be $2 you might have to spend next year. So if you don't do something now, but I think, go ahead.
I like what you're talking about there, John, and Johnny Mac, when you talk about these, these 6 or 7 slides. What I find people doing a really, really good job today at this are they make it outside in no matter where you are in the sales process, you have to first make it all about the person that you're presenting to before you earn the right to make it all about you. I still see companies that say, hey, take that first 6 or 7 slides and tell them all about, all the brands that we're working with, and nobody cares. Like there should be a big sign that says nobody cares. And I think that So when you make it outside in, there's another little factor that I really like is that sometimes they teach people the wrong way to lecture the customer about the industry. And so basically they're saying, hey, your industry's doing this, it's sucking at this, it's struggling with that. But instead of using discovery questions in that opening, because you find like you're lecturing the customer on how bad they suck or how bad their industry sucks. And these are just like little subtle things, but all the data says that if you make it about me, if you go outside in, you make it about me first, and then you earn the right to make it about you. That's the best way to do those presentations. Those I see the best companies doing.
Agreed. For sure. I spent a lot of time really trying to figure out what the appropriate discovery questions are, but I also think that roles are just as important. So making sure on that call that you have one person that can overrule everybody, right? That drives a conversation, that is responsible for the follow-up answers, and will initiate responses from other team members if appropriate, but not to make this we're overwhelming the customer with our knowledge base, or we're trying to impress people on the phone. I run into that constantly. Like, hey, I know more about this business than anybody. I'm going to dump this all on you, and we'll see what happens. The other thing about discovery questions there's uber important is you're leading a customer to an action. And in this case, when you're going through a discovery process, maybe it's to close them to do a POC. Maybe it's to close them to do a sandbox demo, whatever that event is. And I think that's the power of how discovery plays such a vital role in the playbook, which is now you've set all the pieces up, and now you've got to go do the execution on whether or not it's a POC and ultimately the wrap up. But just focusing in on how to build that structure is really, really important. And a lot of times, if you don't have a customer that's very loquacious, then you need to sort of prompt them along. You need to be, available or understand that before you get involved in that conversation. So.
Yeah, you talked about creating a sense of urgency in those 6 to 7 slides, and then leading to the next action. And what is the best way to try to create that sense of urgency? Do you talk about some of the negative consequences of them not solving some of the pains that they have?
I work for Frank Azzolino. There's a lot of urgency all the time. So, yeah. Yeah. And Bill,
we both know Frank very well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll use this example. I'm an old Sandler guy, but I really just robbed Sandler of the two things that I love most about it that worked for me through my whole career, which is quid pro quo and strip lining. And quid pro quo is a great way to build a sense of urgency in the sales process, but I always like to work backwards. So let me give you an example. Mr. Customer, it sounds like you're interested in doing a POC. We are. Okay, let's schedule a wrap-up meeting 3 weeks from now. Okay, now we have a deadline, right? Now we're not running an eval for 90 days. We're running an eval for 3 weeks. Okay, and in the meantime, here's what's going to happen. So we're working backwards from that and getting the customer's buy-in. It's as simple as that in a lot of ways. And it became really, really obvious to me when I was at both Net Gravity and Mobile Iron that if I just said, okay, we're going to do what's good for you, Mr. Customer, or customers want to be told how this process works. Yes. And that's where the urgency is created, right? So, okay, if we're going to do this on February 15th, we're going to get together. We're going to do this free POC for you. But on that wrap-up meeting, I want the VP of infrastructure there. I want the VP of advertising there. We're going to present results. And John, I've heard you say this before. One of the great ways to build a champion is by getting them to participate in that process by presenting. And I worked for a really phenomenal CEO, Joseph Antonelli at Vontu, and he said, "Hey, we got to get the customers involved in this." The data was so compelling, and when the customer would present, we'd get out of there, and they'd want to high five you. They were like, "Thank you. I haven't talked to the CIO ever, and now I got to present this project." And so you just built these chains or these bonds with the champion that are not going to be broken. They're by participating together and really driving it. But creating urgency around dates has always been a significant contributor for me, not around price.
Yeah. And what about, you talked about strip mining. So just educate the audience on what you mean by
strip. Yeah. So strip lining, most of the sales people. Yeah. Strip lining. Yeah. Oh yeah. Most reps are, it's not lazy, it's naive, where they'll say to a customer, hey, John McMahon, we're winning this deal, aren't we? Yeah, we're winning, right? We're not, we're number one. And this is the most painful thing for reps to do. And I know I have a champion and a rep when I hear them say to the customer, hey, it really feels like we're in third place. How do we get to the top? And you're going to get the truth no matter what, right? So either the customer's going to say, yeah, you're in third place, you're losing, or say, what are you talking about? You guys are blowing it out, Right. Yeah. So
my boss thinks I'm spending too much time with this account and I have no chance of winning.
Exactly. Classic.
What you're saying is give them some sort of objection as to why you're spending so much time there. See where you really sit.
Yeah.
That's what
and I've used that throughout my career. I've used that, in interview processes, you name it. So, let me give you guys a little side, just a side story on my getting to PTC, because it is pretty interesting. So IBM signed a deal with Wang. So we were going to start selling AS400s. So I went to an AS400 class. I learned their architecture, blah, blah, boring, whatever. I had a friend at Wang who was at the time probably in his mid 40s, kids, a whole nine yards. His name was Tommy Walter. And Tommy and I go to IBM in Copley Place downtown in Boston. We meet with the IBM team. All they care about is where our installs are and how we can rip them out, right? And I'm like, the Wang dream is over. Well, we go downstairs for a cup of coffee, and of course, when I'm with somebody that's more experienced, and I'm picking his brain on a whole bunch of things, and I turn around and I look, and at the time, Dr. Wang was out, and Fred, his son, had taken over, and there's Fred at 10 o'clock in the morning having a cup of coffee, reading a book, and Tom Walter. I look at Tom Walter. I go, "Hey, you got any friends that are looking to hire a sales guy?" And he looks at me and goes, "I got this guy, Dick Harrison." So I'll leave it with this. I went and interviewed, and I had Harrison, McGinnis, Walsky, and Henrik all in the same room interviewing me at one point, right? And I didn't realize at the time they were just probably nervous because I was young. And Harrison had the best line for me, and they've since used this all. I've used this too. He goes, "Okay, what'd you get on your SATs?" And I said, "Oh boy," and all I can think of is my mother saying, "You better bust your ass studying because somebody's going to ask you someday, right?" Yeah. So I said, I don't know. I think I got like a 1280. Well, did you get a 1250 or a 1280? Did you get a 1211? John, I had to go home and get my results and bring them back to the office to show them. My mother was, "I told you so." She goes, "I told you, right?" But that experience. I walked out of there, and either you say to yourself, I got to be here, or maybe this isn't the culture for me. I said, I got to be there. I got to be a part of this. The product was amazing. So anyway, the rest is
talking about Wang though, and Wang going down, and because the new CEO was reading a book and sipping a cup of coffee at 10 o'clock in the morning. I joined a company called Geotel. We took over the Wang building, or major floors on the Wang building, and you knew that it was going to go down because when you look back and you went into the office that Charles Wang had, I think his name was Charles, right? It was the entire floor of the top building, not just one part of it. The entire floor of the building was his office. It was like ridiculous. Like you walked in and you could throw a football to his desk. It's unbelievable. That's when you know things are going in the wrong direction.
Exactly.
That type of stuff.
He was a visionary. He, in the late 60s, invented magnetic core memory, which, to just until a few years ago, and, flash, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But he, also virtualization. Wang was one of the first ones, but never capitalized on that. Had great word products, had email, all this stuff, and just could not get out of a proprietary architecture. And to this day, I still kind of, the opportunity was there to beat IBM. I mean, we talk about this now. It's like IBM, but back then they were really the guys.
They were big. They were big.
Yeah.
So, Johnny,
Johnny, go ahead.
I just wanted to go back to this one thing on urgency, because I think you guys you hit on something really awesome. You talked about urgency, creating urgency in the sales process. I love that part of the conversation. And there's a moment in all of selling where the creating urgency for the individual you're speaking to, and I think it's just a great opportunity to talk a little bit about getting the customer to stand in their moment of pain. I find the greatest sellers on the planet are the ones that it's not urgent until that customer comes to their own conclusion that it's urgent. And, I like the saying that says people rarely argue with their own conclusions. If you really think about that, some of the best advice I ever got, people rarely argue with their own conclusions. So what that means is if you can get the customer to their own conclusion, and the only way you're going to do that is you got to get them to stand in their moment of pain, which means you have to have discovery, which allows a customer to talk about their current state, problems and negative consequences of a current state, and then momentum and urgency for moving to a future state. And it sounds so simple. I also feel like people overcomplicate that like crazy. It's a basic human behavior. If that person does not make the decision that they have a problem, my mother used to say, she was a therapist, and she used to tell me, I'd say, Mom, how do you get people to, to change, like with drug abuse and stuff like that? And my mom always said, she said, I just lead them to a place where they make their own decision. It never happens by me convinced. I've never convinced anybody to stop taking drugs. And I've thought about that. That's one of the greatest lessons I learned in sales was people have to come to their own conclusions. And I think that's a little bit of a lost art sometimes with all of the pressure, and people are saying, you don't have time. You got to get on the phone. You got to do a demo. No matter what, when we're all long gone, this is Egypt old, it's still going to be about somebody standing in their own moment of pain saying, I have a problem I got to fix. That's never going to go away.
So kudos to your mom. And oftentimes I get great nuggets like that outside of people that are sellers that just know human behavior.
Oh, wow.
And that's that seminal moment of like, you're not, when you're convinced and you've internalized that, you're going to get a deal, and there's no competition at that point either. So, that's.
It's funny you say that, because I got to tell you, like, and I would get in some trouble back in the day. I used to be very, very interested in people that had some connection to a psychology degree, some connection to a human behavior degree.
Sure.
Because if you were all science and you didn't understand human behavior, you were going to be at a disadvantage. I think the greatest sellers on the planet are the ones who understand human behavior. My personal opinion.
I agree. Like, isn't it the most frustrating thing to have a super technical CEO that just says to you, well, why don't they get it? Right. Why won't they do this? Or just tell them to do that. And until they internalize that and own it, to your point, I agree. That's not going anywhere. So, yeah. Yep.
Well, what's the best way, guys, to get people to stand in their pain? So if I'm a listener, sounds fantastic, but great. Tell me the best ways to do that.
It goes back to if you're doing that POC and you're gathering, you're working on, solving these use cases, and you get to this moment of, we're going to present to the management team, where they're presenting to the management team that they own the content and that they're participating in building and constructing that value proposition with you. I think when you do that, you've won the deal.
Because now you definitely have a champion, right? And now
exactly.
You're in total control, right? I always talk about there's three people that can control the deal: the customer, you, or the competition. In the beginning, the customer controls it because you need all this information from them. But the point where you're talking about this dynamic shift where all of a sudden they need information from you in order to present, because they bought into the fact that they have these pains and they want to solve them. And now you're in control, right?
Spot on. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And I think, Johnny, you brought up a great question, like, on the how of this. And I really want our listeners to hang on this one for a second, and anybody that's responsible for. There's two areas of intersection on this conversation. There's knowledge, and then there's skills. And when you go to a company, the company is responsible for the knowledge that allows sellers to go into what I call the warm water. And the warm water is where the problems and challenges are. So every company you interview, you should write down, when you're interviewing, you're looking at a company, you should write down, what problems do they solve for their customers? That's like number one. And if they can't articulate that, then they don't have the knowledge of where the water is warm. The skill around that is to allow the customer to talk about real live experiences about those problems and challenges. So that when you're armed, when you're a seller and you're armed with the knowledge of, hey, look, I know this is warm water, so I can just ask questions. Can you give me some examples of the last time that you had this outcome or what challenge? And that's where those two worlds come together. And I find that companies, the companies do a great job and say, look, we have to give our sellers the knowledge about the problems and challenges and how we solve it differently or better, and where we've done it before with proof points, case studies, testimonies. The skills that the seller needs is how to position that through discovery to allow the customer to take the lead in telling the story about the problem. It's not that, Johnny, we talk about this all the time. It's like, thank God for sales, because I thought it was one of the simplest. I thought it was one of the simplest concepts in the world, which became just kind of brilliant for me. But it was just based on some really simple processes. But it's those two things, Johnny. If you don't have the knowledge and know where the warm water is, then your company hasn't done a great job of leading you to the warm water. And then you just got to ask discovery questions.
Do you think that prescriptive selling helps at all before discovery, where, one of the challenges I had at a previous company was that the reps were just diving into discovery, right? Not really qualifying. So I said, okay, we're going to give you these four. If you don't have one of these four problems, your unstructured data is all over the place. You can't access this on a if you don't have one of those four things, we're not going to waste any time. I think I'm a big believer that really helps in the discovery.
1,000%.
Okay. Yeah.
1,000%. And it's the company's responsibility. We call those at Force Management, we call those value drivers, meaning
I love it.
If you wind up in a place where it's really warm here, the water's warm, jump in. And companies, I see a lot of technical founders that they just don't get that. Like, they have that in their mind. They know where the water's warm, and they get frustrated that nobody else can talk about where the water's warm. Well, it's where those two worlds come together. It's the knowledge about the warm water, and it's the skills about how to jump in and how to get the customer to jump in with you.
I think first and foremost, just before that, though, John, there's John, and John here.
Yeah.
Before that,
Yeah.
What I think is important is to what John Donnelly's talking about is essentially the ICP, the ideal customer profile.
Yeah.
If you don't have some of these things, then you're really not in our sweet spot. Yeah, we could probably sell you something, but it's going to be like a corner case. It's going to be really difficult for us to jam our stuff in there and get the real value that we want from it for the customer and for us, right? And then to your point, when you have three, then it narrows down to 3 or 4 different use cases that you give really great, you have real high differentiation versus the competition, and you give the customer really amazing value. What happens is, like, I remember going into a company and I said, let's go over the use cases that you have. And they listed 13 different use cases on the board. This is the executive team, right? But I'm the new guy.
When you see something you like is what I call it.
And I said, guys, I might have to leave now. And they said, why? And I said, I can't train sales guys to 13 different use cases. I looked at the marketing guy. You can't market to 13 different use cases. I looked at the development guy and I said, and you can't be best of breed in 13 different use cases. So we have to narrow this down to 3 or 4 where I can actually train my reps. You can market to it and you could develop to it, right? And it didn't mean that we couldn't sell to use case number 10. But again, you weren't going to get the value, and neither was the customer. So why waste your time, to your point, John Donnelly? Now if it's in the ICP and it's in these 3 or 4 key value drivers that John talks about or Cap talks about, home run, let's stay. Let's go.
Yeah, stay on this one, John Donnelly and Johnny Mac, on this ICP, because you're not only talking about problems and challenges and use cases, but there are also probably in an ICP, I like to see ICPs go all the way down to like things about the customer, because you could have a customer that has those problems, but there's certain things going on in that environment that's not going to be ideal for us. So do you guys agree with that? So sometimes people just say this.
But I call that as the propensity to buy, right?
Yes.
So let's say let's say we go through the ICP and there's insurance company, and we're a startup and there's insurance companies and financial organizations, but then there's also, just, companies that are, 3 or 4 billion. Now, when I go back and say who has the highest propensity to buy, even though they're in my ICP, I start ruling out crisscross the financial guys, crisscross the government, crisscross, on insurance companies. They don't have a high propensity to buy. A lot of times it's tied to their product life cycles. The companies I think that typically, if I had to say one parameter that I'd love to see is a really short product life cycle. Typically they get the best people. They're not scared of new technologies or implementing new technology. They move fast because they have no choice. If they have to put out a new product every 6 months or every year versus a car company or an airplane company puts out a new product every 10 or 20 years.
Great one.
They don't have to move fast.
You see the same thing, John Donnelly?
An example of propensity to buy.
I love that
description. It's the refresh cycle, right? So if you have a short refresh cycle, I never thought of it that way, and I've broken verticals down based on that. And especially when you get into storage or networking or any of the infrastructure components. So that's really interesting. That's it's super enlightening to get down to that level. I will say this is when you're in an early stage startup, this is the hardest thing to do. And this is the biggest disagreement. You have the CEO saying we should be selling to the CIO. This is really important to them, and it's their baby. They want to push that agenda to the CIO. I sat with 7 CIOs 2 years ago, and I said, "Hey, when's the last time you really took an unsolicited email?" Never. When's the last time you took an? It's just access to them only comes through their lieutenants, and figuring out within that group who owns what and who does what is getting honestly a little bit easier now that AI has allowed us to just literally go through and make some guesses on certain things. ICP is at times when you crack that code is the accelerator to get you moving forward. Mm-hmm. And I'll give you a quick story. Like getting down to like literally the title. I had an awesome customer when I was at NetGravity. Tom Dearline and I, Time Warner. The largest site in the world at the time was Pathfinder, which was Time Warner's site, and they had about 1 million. We called them hits back then a day. And Eduardo Samame was running the website, and he used a term called ad master. He said, "Hey, here's what an ad master does. They rotate the ads. They do this and this." I mean, this is basic stuff back then, right? Well, today. So what I did was I took an ad out. I couldn't find anybody that back then you had to call. Is there an ad master here? Whatever. So yeah. I put an ad out in the Newsday help wanted section for an ad master, and I put the salary uber high, like $75K, and I had 18 people respond, and I closed 9 deals. So that was my ICP, but I just had a hard time title wise, right? And from a different perspective, your whole idea around refresh, I've seen that time and time again. And now that I look back at it in the mobile business, definitely in cybersecurity. So that's uber interesting. It's a place I'm gonna spend some more time learning about.
Well, the point you just brought up is making sure that your reps are targeting the persona that actually owns that measurement. I always say, like, how are they measured? That you have to figure out who owns the measure that we're trying to fix, right? And a lot of times these days, though, you have a lot of CROs that just tell their reps, get more meetings, get more meetings, get more meetings, do more calls, do more video conferences. But so what the reps do is they do how they're managed, and they run out and they get a meeting and they start the discovery process and all that. And they're happy because they got a meeting and that's what the big boss is telling them to do. But they're talking to the wrong people, the wrong person. They got to go get to, as your point, I got to go get to the ad master.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, ICP has always been looking back through the years, just who are the right customers that we should be calling on and when. It's
well, there's the propensity to buy, John Donnelly, I think, and there's also the sales complexity. I'm a startup, and now I got to go sell to a multi-billion-dollar financial company where I'm going to go through a giant process, and I'm going to have it. The procurement process is going to be 3 to 4 months, and negotiating the terms and conditions are going to be onerous. Do I really have time to point my sales force in that direction? Probably not.
I had either Smith or maybe it was Eli Lilly, the CIO. We made it to a meeting, and he said, "Well, if you've made it this far, you should get a trophy and award." So, yeah,
Because he knew how complex it was.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah, he's like, if you got through that door.
You know what I love about this conversation, what you guys just talked about for me was, or is, the understanding how that buyer buys. Like, there's a lot of people say, this is our ICP. And I say, okay, so walk me through how that buyer buys. And when that's not clear, you know that there are challenges, because it's in understanding how that buyer buys, not just that they have a problem, but how they buy or how they acquire your goods and services will tell you a lot about your ability to align and how you sell and what you sell. Many times, if I just ask, people can tell me what their sales process is all day long. I'll say, walk me through your sales process. They put it up there. And then I always ask, the first question I ask is, how does the buyer buy? And sometimes people just look at me like, what do you mean? But I think that's important. If you're listening to this today and you don't begin with how that buyer buys, it makes no sense to have a sales process. And because if it's not aligned to it, it doesn't matter. So you could have a complex buyer, you could have different stages, different multi-threaded buyers or what have you. So that has a ton to do with this concept of an ICP. How does the buyer buy?
Absolutely.
Who brought up AI? I think John Donnelly did. What point were you making there? Now that I've got AI, that piqued my interest. What were you?
I just I look at I sold a deal when I was at PTC to L'Oreal down in Syosset, New York, and they had 50 draftsmen with draftsman tables, et cetera. And when I look at automation and the impact it has, that it's real and it's going to impact sales in a significant. It already has. We walked in there, we sold, and true story. And also, I want to point out, I'd be remiss not to say this, like this. The single most important person in any sales cycle that I've gone through, my partner is my SE. And the SEs, when you have a business-oriented SE, not just a demo jockey, somebody that really understands what you're trying to do, it makes a world of difference.
Yeah.
So Bob Lineback and I went into this account at L'Oreal, and we sold the VP of Engineering, Jack Johnson, almost $1 million deal. And we went to when the draftsman saw the product, and that PTC created the drawings automatically. There was people walked away shaking their heads, and oh God, here we go, right? And it was around Christmas time, and the next meeting I had, it came out to my car. My car had a huge frozen turkey like smashed in the window, and obviously it was from one of those guys, because they saw the writing on the wall. Jack was going to eliminate all the draftsmen. So, and kudos to Bob Lineback. And,
Wow.
He said, hey, let's do this. Let's put together a training class for these guys. And two things happened. One, we gained back credibility within the account, made Jack's life a lot easier, made him more solid, because there was a lot of like angst in the organization. Projects were slowing down, shockingly, right? And the second thing is, I was on Long Island, and Long Island was a great territory to sell MCAT after 1950s, when manufacturing was popular on Long Island. So there were few accounts out there, but with those people that we trained on Pro Engineer, all went out there, like Long Island Electric. They all showed up there, and they're like, "We need Pro Engineer," right? They got more money, et cetera. But the reality is that. Selling in that kind of environment around today without using AI, you're making a huge mistake. So the BDR function, we've created a completely automated BDR motion using products like Copy AI, where it writes like me, right? So it can do the research that used to take us seriously, like, hours to do, is done in seconds. So I want to look at all the publicly traded companies in my territory and map what Qumulo or Net Gravity or Mobile Iron does, and it'll send you back a list. It's amazing. And oh, by the way, write a 2-paragraph description around why we're important to their organization. We're on the tip of the iceberg right now, but the automation piece is coming full force. I got BDRs right now. I've been in 2 organizations where they had around 40 or 50 that now have 0.
Oh, wow. So it's just the reps. It's the enterprise sales reps that are using tools like Copy AI.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I think the next big motion on AI is going to be around sales activity. So we have the whole idea of CRM and, you've got these databases of information, but really helping the salespeople, earn their base salary. Like, what are the daily tasks that I need to do in order to generate leads? Or as marketing is sort of, getting disintermediated also around content, right? Sales reps can build content now on the fly, specific to our point earlier around verticals or people very quickly, right? Based on using AI products. And products like Gong or Ficus, right? They allow you to actually create these coaching moments. And at some point in the not too distant future, when you're on a call, be able to recommend questions to ask the customer or actually start being involved in those conversations. I mean, it's all happening very quickly. And, I've seen a bunch of evolutions, mini computers to local area networks to e-commerce, et cetera. This is by far the biggest one. It's going to be the most impactful to how sales works and how it processes.
So right now you're seeing it mostly at the SDR function. It sounds like a little bit but it's almost disintermediating the SDR function.
It is.
Allowing the sales reps to be a lot more productive and tailor messages to their specific customers. Are you seeing it in any other areas right now?
Yeah, I think
where do you think it's going to come next?
I think in sales operations, it'll have a huge impact. The days of like SQL queries and all this crap that we deal with generating reports out of Salesforce, those days are gone, or about to be reinvented. And decisions around, we talked, one of the big things, and I give the team at Vontu a lot of credit for this, like we would find deals in motion, right? And how much money should we be spending on going after deals that are in motion or expand opportunities? Just figuring out that dynamic based on real close rates and real data. It's a game changer for how we spend marketing dollars, as one. I'd be a little nervous if I were folks like Clary that, I think there's a big opportunity for them to execute on, but if they don't, that they could be outside looking in. At Salesforce, I think that, I've probably met 20 people in the last year that are trying to build a product to compete against Salesforce that's more AI driven and not just a, sales contact gold mine, environment.
Salesforce.com is got, everybody knows, has tons of issues. I never met a CRO that actually likes it. And the biggest problems I see with that is, you tell all you guys to update the forecast at 5:00, but Tuesday at 9:00, it's outdated, right? Because you're not getting any real-time information, right? The second thing is people game the system, right? That's why you have to have forecast calls because, Cap might have a deal that really belongs in stage 4. He's a younger salesperson. He doesn't really know, but or it should be in stage 2 and he puts it in stage 4, right? Yeah. So you have to figure out that it's actually in stage 2. And then I'm a really super great salesperson like Marty Carty, who we knew, and he's got a multi-million-dollar deal at a pharmaceutical company, but he doesn't want all levels of management calling him every day, hey, where's that multi-million-dollar deal? So he sticks it in stage 2 when it really belongs in stage 4. And you have to, put Marty Carty up in front of everybody and figure out where this deal really is. And that's the biggest problem with Salesforce.com. It's just a dumb repository.
Right. So my belief is that products like Gong or Ficus or any of the conversational driven solutions, now you have a repository of the conversation that happened yesterday with the customer. And now I think, John, that turning point you just described of we're going to take the actual deal management out of the rep's hands and put it into an AI motion that says, okay, based on the customer saying these three things and agreeing to do this, and then discussion about price. Like, would it shock you guys if you knew that the faster you talk about price, if you talk about price within the first 8 minutes of a sales call, you have a 50% greater chance of closing it? Those are the type of things we're going to start popping up. Right.
Yeah, you want to see what you're talking about is gaining insights from what your sales guys are doing and gaining those insights in real time. The problem right now, like you said, is that all that data that a sales rep uses, it's not a common set of apps that they use. You go from even one rep in your own company to the other rep, they're using different apps. So stuff is stored in Word and Excel and Salesforce.com and Clary and Gong and Outreach. Yep. And you're like, what? Yeah. Why can't somebody aggregate all this stuff and give me some real-time insights? But the problem is, I think all those tools have been built for the sales leaders. No one's ever built the tool for the rep that they want to use it instead of all these other things.
That's right.
That's why they're okay at gaming these other systems, because they're like, I'll just put in whenever I want to put it in or when the boss tells me to put the data in.
Exactly. Yeah, we grew up in that era of flopping, sticking discs in for gold buying, just hitting them back and forth. And I think there's such an opportunity now to reinvent this whole space. And I think, sales will become more important in the AI-driven market. To a point where those relationships that we described earlier on between us and the customer. And you had Tom Dearline on. We talked a little bit earlier about him, but that was one of the admirable things I saw with Tom, is that he had personal relationships with his customers, and he felt like he was on the hook. And those are tough people to find. And, I really appreciated Tom for that and respected him for, having customers show up at the office unannounced, going out. I try to think of myself as a social being, but he took it to the next level, and he found connections that, we could probably find in other places through just having a personal conversation with somebody. So a ton of respect.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is, we can get all the AI tools we want in the world, but nothing's going to replace the art.
You got it.
Of people speaking to people.
So this is really important what you guys are talking about. And my advice to people out there is embrace the technology that's coming down the pike. If you're a seller, embrace the technology that's coming at you, and don't wait till you're, want to do it. Don't have to do it, want to do it. And I would tell you, like these Egypt-old concepts on human behavior, the value of a relationship, and almost in our industry a few years ago got to be she's a relationship seller. And I always found that very strange when people were kind of telling me that was, there was something wrong with that. I'm telling you, the power of a personal relationship is going to become even greater in the future. And if you don't know how to do that, both in your personal life and in your professional life, you're really going to be at risk. So that's what's screaming at me that's coming out of AI right now. Huge.
Yep. John, we've got a couple more minutes. Tell us a little bit about your new opportunity here, and hopefully I don't mispronunciate the name. Qumulo, right?
Yeah. Qumulo.
Is that close?
Qumulo.
Yeah, that's
Qumulo.
The mascot for the company is an angry kumquat. So if you ever get a chance, if you go on the website, I don't know the story behind it. I haven't asked yet, but
you're afraid to ask.
Exactly. Yeah. So I told the story about EMC earlier in my career and not getting an opportunity there. So I knew I had to end up at storage at some point. So when I look at opportunities, today I felt like cybersecurity was getting a little overwhelming. I think there's edge cases some use cases that startups can be successful at, but for the most part, there's a lot of companies that are building $50 to $100 million businesses and then getting gobbled up for, relatively insignificant multiples, but raising a shit ton of money.
Yeah,
right.
You see that a lot in security. Yeah.
Tons. So that was a business when I started in the early 2000s, I said, this will be a good 10 to 15 year second And then when I got to like 2013, 14, I said, wow, this could be a forever run. Right. So when I went out this like second half of my career, I really wanted to focus on some of the infrastructure pieces, whether or not it be networking or storage. And how I came across Qumulo is Doug Gourlay, who was the youngest VP of anything at Cisco. Chambers promoted him. He's super smart, really driven, knows the technology, knows the use cases. And I've worked with him on a couple projects in a previous life. So really attracted by having Doug there in the leadership role. Also, I knew that the unstructured data market's a mess. And you've got, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, you've got folks like Dell, Isilon. You've got a couple of the bigger guys like NetApp. They're all on-prem. There's no interest for them to build any kind of infrastructure to support cloud, data processing or any of the unstructured data that's currently sitting in S3 or EC2 or on Microsoft Azure. So, how do you bridge that gap? Especially now as companies go to adopt, LLMs and trying to figure out what they have and how valuable their data is. And unstructured data makes a huge piece of that pie. So just being able to access that data and treat that data as it were if it were on-prem is super compelling to customers. Now, the company's been around for a long time, but they've been doing the on-prem stuff for a while. What attracted me was not only Doug, but the fact they were releasing these new products. So they're really, in essence, a startup. And the team I have there has been selling on-prem solutions, but has the aptitude to do that. But many of the things we talked about when we were gold standard and, building the proper playbook. It is teaching an old dog new tricks. And, as I used to say to any of the sales teams that I have run in the past is, hey, if you follow the playbook, you will make money. You will get rich off of this. It's right. the folks that say, no, I'm going to do it my way. And I make the analogy, I was a kicker in high school and college. And when you went in the locker room, if you were in a locker room, and everybody was treated equally, and everybody, even if you're the star quarterback. So I want a locker room that has both the star quarterback and the kicker are on the same page. And if that happens, then you start to see that, overall quarter attainment number go up from 40 to 50. Now we're at 60%. And if you're in the high 60s, 70%, you're crushing it. So, Qumulo is a special place. These new products being announced, I'm really excited about. And probably this time next year, we should revisit this conversation and give you an update on where we are.
Good.
So
We'd
super excited. Yeah.
Thanks a lot for doing this, John. Appreciate it.
Yeah, John, it's great seeing you. Yeah, John Kaplan, pleasure meeting you. Finally meeting you. I've heard a lot about you.
You too, brother.
Great.
Thanks, John Donnelly.
Thanks, guys.
John Kaplan. And thanks to everyone for listening to another episode of the Revenue Builders Podcast.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. Be sure to check us out at forcemanagement.com.